Hey there, and welcome to a new episode of the Dietitian Success Podcast. I'm your host, Krista Kolajesic, and every week we talk about business, marketing, and entrepreneurship, specifically for registered dietitians. I am the founder of Dietitian Success Center, and I just love talking about entrepreneurship, and so that's what we do every week. I address 3 questions that I've either seen out in the wild, or I've had asked to me personally, or I've seen come up in our community, or have come up on our office hours entrepreneurship coaching calls that we offer every second week in the entrepreneurship membership. So these are just questions that I know are circulating within the dietetics community and situations that you all are dealing with. So today we are talking about one-offs versus packages. So if you have a private practice and you're working with patients or clients one-on-one, we'll talk about situationally when it might make sense to offer one-offs versus packages versus both. We're going to talk about how to decide where to spend money in your business. So we're going to talk about how do you evaluate when something is actually going to give you a return on your investment, and how to make those money decisions a little bit easier in business without having all of like the guilt and the weight associated with them. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what happens if you get clients or customers who are the wrong fit, either on a discovery call or you've actually already agreed to work with them and now you're trying to figure out what to do. So we'll tackle those 3 questions. Let's start off as per usual with a little business update, personal update. So personally, this past weekend was Mother's Day, which was so awesome. So awesome. We had just a lovely Mother's Day. I feel like now that the weather's getting nicer, if you have small kids, you probably are in the same boat where you just find that you pretty much live at the playground or like live outside. You're just like always looking for activities to do. And so we've been outside so much, which has been so awesome. And actually, my mom, me, and my baby, Ramsey, are traveling to Toronto at the end of this month to do a site visit for the Dietitian Success Summit, which, if you don't already know, is our live in-person event, which is happening this September in Toronto, Ontario. And so we are so excited to, we're actually going to fly to Toronto and do a little site visit, just, check out the location, film. So my content manager, Olivia, she just lives up like in Northern Ontario. And so she is going to meet me. Our event planner, Kirsty, is going to meet us as well. We're all going to meet at the location. We're going to film some content. We're going to just scope out the space. We're going to figure out where everything is going to go, how everything's going to happen, what the flow is going to look like. I just know it's going to feel really good to start getting some more tangibleness to the whole experience. I'm really excited about that. And just to be able to like visualize what it's actually going to be and look like. For those of you who are listening who have already purchased your ticket, we're so excited to see you there. It's going to be amazing. The entrepreneurship tickets have been super popular. And so I'm just so excited to be able to run that 3rd day. So it's like a 3-day event, and a part of the 2nd day and the 3rd day is really all going to be all about business planning for the next 12 months. So it's going to be pretty awesome. You're going to leave with something very, very, very concrete, and I'm so excited to be able to offer that. So yeah, that is update from me. So let's just get right into the content, shall we? So this question of offering one-offs or packages. So I'll read the question or the situation here. So I've been offering single sessions to my clients, but I keep seeing other dietitians talk about packages. I'm not sure if I should switch, keep both, or just stick with what I have. How do you decide whether to offer one-off sessions, packages, or both? And does it depend on the type of practice that you're running? So essentially how I answer this question is that I do not believe that there's one single right way to go about this, because I have seen dietitians have success with any of those 3 models: one-off sessions, one-off and packages, and only packages. I've seen it across the board. So I simply cannot say that one one strategy is better than another. However, there are going to be pros and cons to each. So let's talk through the pros and cons of each. And then that's always how I like to coach and how I like to provide information and feedback is I like to be able to give you your options, lay out the pros and cons that I've actually seen in practice, and then empower you and help you make that decision for yourself based on your own values, your own goals. And so the way that I coach around this or the way that I talk about this is never going to be the same for every single person. And so that's, I think, why there's so much value in our entrepreneurship membership is because we can have those conversations together. So you're not just having to, go one direction because you think that you should, but you don't really know, or maybe it feels misaligned for you. So let's talk about the pros and cons of each. So pros and cons of one-off sessions. A couple of the pros here. So pros is just the simplicity of one-off sessions. And essentially what this means is that somebody books a one-off session with you and then, and then they book follow-up sessions with you afterwards, but they just book like the one-off session. And this is typically what we see more commonly in a lot of other areas of healthcare. So for example, like if I'm going to see a physiotherapist or I'm getting a massage or whatever, or going to a psychologist, then the one-off session model is quite common out in healthcare. And so it's very simple. It's simple when it comes to billing. It is just simple. And, it can be easier to get them to opt in to a one-off session because it just feels a little bit lower risk for them, especially if they've never experienced working with a dietitian before. Now, one of the cons in the one-off sessions is that you as the dietitian are then required to ensure that you are properly communicating the value of continuing for follow-ups after that first session with you and after the second session and after the third session, right? We're sort of always having to sell people on the idea of continuing with something long-term because, as we all know, behavior change takes time, and nutrition change, actually making meaningful changes in your life, is not just something that happens overnight. And people require accountability. They require support in order to have lasting success. They require somebody to be able to help them when roadblocks come up. And so we know that working with a dietitian longer term can be more effective. And so the challenge there too is that, the client doesn't know what they don't know. And so if they come to you for a one-off session, they think, wow, yeah, I just learned so much information. Okay, great, I'm good. But we're sitting there thinking, well, no, we just scratched the surface in terms of what we could possibly cover together. They might think, oh yeah, I'm good to go. And they might walk away and they come to a roadblock, they, have trouble implementing the material, and they may not necessarily know to come back. And so, that can be one of the challenges in offering one-off sessions. Like I said, can be one of the challenges, but isn't always. Some dietitians really prefer this option, and that's totally cool. But so there's some of the pros and cons. So let's talk about packages next. So what are some of the pros of packages and maybe some of the cons of packages? So pros of packages is that, we get that longer term commitment. And so the thing that I hear with dietitians who are really interested in packages or prefer the package approach is oftentimes, they've been doing one-off sessions and perhaps they're feeling like, oh, I just really wish I could work with a client for longer periods of time because I really think we would have better success together. They like having that longer term relationship with a client. They feel like they can provide more value in a longer term relationship, or they feel like they were getting burnt out from the one-off session model, right? They're offering one-off sessions and they're just feeling like the burnout is starting to kick in. And so they want to offer something else, something that is really going to attract that ideal client, the person who wants to stick around for longer, that's really more invested in that longer term transformational change. And so packages, essentially what those are is it's a collection of one-on-one sessions. So it's it's up to the dietitian to really decide like what is the package approach that works best for what they're teaching. Again, there's no one size fits all approach here. So how many sessions, the duration, etc. So it can include one-on-one sessions. It can include other things as well in the package, meal planning, email support, etc., etc. There's a lot of different inclusions that can go along with that. And so that can be really great too, right? Because we're able to build that like depth of relationship with that individual person. Now, the caveat to that is that obviously with packages, it's going to be a higher upfront investment. And so then the onus is on the dietitian to really be able to communicate why it is the way it is, and make sure they have really effective sales and marketing messaging on their website, in their discovery call, etc., to ensure that they can communicate about, why are there not just one-off sessions? Why are we working together long-term? Why is this going to be beneficial for you, the patient or the client? So some pros and cons there. Now, what about having both? You might be thinking, well, Krista, doesn't it just sound great to have both options? Well, maybe, but also maybe not, because if you're in a situation where you are really, you're getting started and perhaps you're really feeling unsure how to appropriately communicate the value of why someone should choose a package approach and why that can be valuable for them. And, you have the two options of one-off versus package. The client may more often default to the one-off because it's the lower risk option for them, right? If you give them two options and they're not clear on what the true difference is between the two, except for the price point, well, they're probably going to pick the less expensive option, right? The one-off session, because that feels like it's lower risk to them. And they're sitting there being like, well, I could just do multiple one-off sessions. Why do I have to do the package, right? Now, conversely, if you feel like you're able to really communicate effectively what a package can do for someone, a one-off session can be a really great way to get them in the door or to have them book a discovery call, and then to be able to communicate the difference between the two and when you may want to choose one versus choosing the other. So again, it can be good. Now, the other thing I've heard dietitians say, which I think is just so, interesting and a very intuitive reflection, is this came up in our community last week. And I was like, that's so interesting. And I think that's so true for so many practitioners, is when they offer both, they find themselves out of insecurity, always defaulting back to the one-off session because they're not convinced that they can provide as much value in the package as they can. They can, we all externally know that they can, but as, practitioners, as business owners, there's often a lot of insecurity there of like, oh, but what if somebody makes the investment and they don't get what they need out of it, or I'm not able to deliver in the way that they expect, it doesn't meet their expectations, et cetera, which, that is a completely separate mindset challenge. But they themselves end up kind of sabotaging their own success by always defaulting to the one-off session because it also feels safer for them too. This is really interesting. It's such an interesting question, and I hope that through answering this question, you see that it's not quite as simple as you might think, but it can also be quite simple. If you're just getting started and you're like, this is just, feeling very complicated and feeling very overwhelming, my recommendation usually is like, start with one-off sessions. Like, keep it easy, make it easy for you. Just don't overcomplicate it. It's always something you can change and shift over time. And if you're like, Krista, but I don't know if I should just try packages or not. Well, what's the risk in just trying it for a month or two? Offering packages for a month or two and just seeing how that goes for you. And then you can always tweak and change moving forward, right? That's the thing about business. Nothing is ever set in stone. I want you to always treat these decisions like experiments. How is this going to work for me? How does this feel? Until you land on the thing that really feels right for you. Okay, let's move on to question number 2. Okay, cost versus investment, or how do you decide what to spend money on in your business? So here's the situation. I'm trying to be more intentional about where I spend money in my business, but I genuinely struggle to know what's worth investing in and what's just a nice to have. How do you decide whether something is a real investment in your business growth versus just an expense? And how do you get over the mental block of spending money when revenue isn't where you want it to be yet? Okay, so this is such an important question because this actually is a skill set that has to develop. And until you have a business, you likely have never had to develop this skill set. And this is a skill set that is often, for healthcare providers, it is a steep learning curve in terms of reprogramming our brains to figure out how we spend money in our business. So here's what I mean by that. So up until the point that you have a business, you've probably always viewed things that you buy as costs. Perhaps, you may have thought of them as investments. I'll define what that means in a second, but likely you have thought of things as costs, right? So you've looked at the groceries that you're buying every week and you've thought those cost me X amount of dollars. You're looking at a new shirt you want to buy and you're thinking that costs me X number of dollars. We're always thinking of costs as things that are draining our bank accounts, right? Money is going out all the time. So that is really how we think about a cost. Now, when we start a business or when we're running a business, suddenly we have to retrain our brains to think about how we're spending money in the frame of an investment. So to ask ourselves the question, and really the definition of an investment, is we spend money with the expectation that we will be getting a return on that money. We will be making the same amount or more, and that's the ideal situation, is we'll be making more than that money back in our business. So we are investing a certain amount of our money and we are getting a bigger return from that money. It's a really different reframe. And so, when I see dietitians that are starting businesses and they're like, yeah, but I just have so many costs that are adding up, right? I'm paying for my Practice Better EMR. I'm paying for my website. So we're thinking about these again as cost. And so my strategy here is always to then ask you, well, no, or really say to you, well, no, this is not a cost, this is an investment. So by paying $30 a month or whatever it is for your EMR system, how much time are you freeing up to be able to work with paying clients or to be able to market yourself to get more paying clients? Like that is the return on that investment. Anytime you make an investment in something that frees up your time, you're then able to ask yourself, well, how can I spend that time more effectively to get a better return, to get more patients, more clients, more business, more members, more purchases, etc. So we always have to put anything that we're spending money on in our business should always go through the lens of, is this how do I think about this as a business investment? Now, the other piece to the question, okay, well, how do you decide whether something is a real investment in your business growth versus just an expense? So I always recommend thinking about this in two ways. I want you to think about what is the likelihood and what is the magnitude. So what I mean by that is when you're making a purchase in your business, what is the likelihood that you will make that money back and make a positive return? So actually make more than that money back. And what is the potential magnitude of that investment? So how much could you potentially make from that one single purchase? So I'll give you an example here. So perfect example of this is last year, I made the decision to go to a workshop, and it was the Alex Hormozi scaling workshop. So Alex Hormozi is quite popular in the business and entrepreneurship world. He creates a lot of content, writes books, has a podcast related to business and entrepreneurship. And they offer something called the Scaling Workshop. And they used to do it every month. I don't know if they still do. Maybe they do. But it's essentially a 2-day in-person event at their headquarters in Las Vegas, where it's 9 to 5 for 2 days. And it's super intensive training and coaching and masterminding around how to scale your business. Now, the cost of that 2-day event is $5,000. So $5,000 US plus the cost of travel. So as somebody who is a Canadian, I always think about things in Canadian dollars. So $5,000 US is going to be closer to 7,000 Canadian dollars. Plus then the travel, the flights, the hotel. So all in, my cost for that 2-day event was probably close to maybe $9,000. Let's just just to be conservative here, is probably about $9,000. So you might be thinking to yourself, oh my God, what? That's insane. How could you possibly spend that much money on a 2-day event? But here's how I look at that. So our membership is $799 a year. Okay. So that's for the practitioner. And then we also have the entrepreneurship membership, which is $19.99 per year at the time of this recording. So when I ask myself, okay, if I invest this amount of money, about $9,000 of my money into this event, and I learn all about scaling my business, how realistic is it that I will make a positive return from that investment? And what is the potential magnitude of that investment? Okay, so first of all, how realistic is it? Well, okay, if I go to this event, and I'm just pulling out my calculator right now, and I say, $9,000 divided by $799. So that would mean we would have to have about, 11 new clients over the course of the next year in order for me to make back a positive investment. Now, I know enough now to know that in my business, when I learn from other people and I'm able to implement tactics from people that have made way more money than me, are way further ahead than me, and know way more than me, and when I actually implement that material in my business, the likelihood that I will see that return is incredibly high. Right? I know that now. I know when I learn from other people, that is how I make the money back in my business. That is how I grow. That is how my business becomes more successful. So when I ask myself, well, what is the likelihood that I will make that investment over the course of the next year? And I usually think about it over a year cycle, because that's typically how I think about expenses and revenues in my business, is over the course of the next 12 months. And so I think to myself, well, yeah, that seems incredibly realistic, right? That's only one new member every single month, approximately. And so if we're implementing this information that's going to help me scale my business, well, yeah, I can reasonably expect that I will get at least one more member every single month, for sure. Now, the next part of this question is the magnitude question, which is, not just thinking about the direct return to be able to break even on that investment, but what's the potential magnitude here? If I implement what I learn at this workshop, what's the potential size of the return on that investment? So I asked myself, well, okay, I know this person knows a lot. I know this person has been where I am right now, and they have the answers that will take me, months and months and months, years and years and years to figure out myself. So by learning from them, I am essentially shortcutting that process, right? I'm learning all the information that it took them 10 years to figure out on their own, and they are teaching it to me. So we're condensing it down into a 2-day session. And so if I think about the magnitude of that information, well, I, really the sky is the limit there. And I know that I am going to get a plus positive return on that investment. And in fact, I absolutely have. I don't know, because I never actually did that. It would be impossible for me to look at what are the exact lessons that I learned from that workshop in isolation that I implemented, and then how did those return, did those exact actions result in new members? I don't know. However, I do know that generally when I look back, I learned a lot from that scaling workshop. A lot of stuff that changed my mindset, changed how I run my business, changed how I do things day to day, that I bet so far, we've had at least a 10x return on that investment, at least. And by the way, the other thing about that is I learned so much from that 2 days that I will carry with me for the rest of my business journey. And so I'll continue. That return is going to continue to amplify every single year. So over the course of my business journey, I'll probably have a 200 times return on that investment. So then you ask yourself, well, okay, then was it worth it to pay that $5,000 for a ticket? Yeah, obviously it was worth it. That's a really important way that we think about cost versus expense in business. And this will get easier to do over time. The more you realize how much coaching or learning or expanding your skill set, or what tools actually do provide you with a return on your investment. Because there have been tools like tech platforms that we've tried to use that we've thought, oh, this is going to be really great. And then we either don't end up using them, or, they just didn't give us the return on our investment that we thought. So you will learn over time, what actually delivers a return and what doesn't for you. And this is a conversation I've been having actually a lot with people. And I'm going to just talk about this for a second, because I think it'll be helpful for you if you've been on the fence about whether you should come to the summit. So the early bird tickets are still on sale until the beginning of June. I've been encouraging people to really think about the cost of the summit as a return on your investment. Like, what is the ROI there going to be? If you're in a room full of other dietitian entrepreneurs and you're listening to them talk about marketing tactics and running businesses and what has worked for them, and you're listening to me, teach you through marketing and what I've observed from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dietitians who have come through our membership and who we've taught business and entrepreneurship to, you are short-circuiting the next 5 to 10 years of you having to figure that out by yourself by coming to a 3-day event. And so, the early bird tickets are $10.99. And if you're a DSC member, you get it for $9.99 because you get $100 off. And so, if you're buying this ticket for $9.99, and let's say that you are even traveling in, and that's an extra $500 to $1,000 for travel or for accommodation, whatever. So let's say it's $2,000 all in. Well, let's pretend that you are somebody who is selling packages and you have a package that's about $500. You only have to get 4 new clients over the next year in order to get a neutral return on that investment, in order to make that money back. That's that should be a no-brainer in my opinion, right? It's like, whoa, the opportunity for super positive return is wild there, right? And it really is, especially if you're local to Toronto, in my opinion, it should really be a no-brainer to come to the summit, because the amount that you'll learn is just going to be it's going to pay you in dividends for years and years and years to come. There's no other way that you can learn what has worked for other people than to be in a room with other people where they're talking about what has worked for them. So anyways, that's all that to say, that's the framework that I use to think about cost versus investment. So it's a really interesting topic. I love this topic. And, an example of a not positive ROI. So I'll just share this example right now and just to make sure and present both sides here. But I often do this where I will invest in some sort of a tech platform that I think is going to be really, really helpful. And then either I don't spend the time to actually figure it out, or I just don't use it in the way that I thought I would, or I just think it's going to be some magic bullet. And as we know in business, if you've heard me talk about this topic, there's never a magic bullet. Everything takes time. Everything takes effort. But anyways, the other day I got hit with an Instagram ad for this AI tool called Stanley. And as you know, I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, is I really feel like we've figured out the content strategy for our @Dietitian Success Center Instagram account, because it's been growing and we get tons of engagement. It's awesome. It's really doing what it's supposed to do. But for my @christaco.rd Instagram account, we're still trying to figure that out. What is the content strategy there? What's the messaging that's going to resonate the most? And so I got hit with an Instagram ad for this this AI tool called Stanley, and I signed up for their free trial, and I still haven't used it yet. I did that a week ago, and I have it on my list of things to do, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to get to that. Anyways, that tool is something that helps you think about, helps you plan your strategy for your Instagram account. And I just still haven't done it yet. And so I don't know yet whether this is going to be a positive return on my investment, but it may not. If I put effort into actually using it, into figuring it out and whatever, then it probably could be. But if I never use it, well, it's not going to be. And at this point, I should know that often when I try and jump on these tools, it doesn't end up being a positive return for me, because I have so much other stuff going on that I don't I will often just not put the time and energy into actually learning and figuring out the tool. Is just not the biggest priority for me right now. But, I still have time to make it a positive ROI, right? Like I'm on the free trial. I could put an hour into that today to figure it out. And I'm sure it would help me create a strategy that could have a positive ROI. But if I don't do anything about it, I won't. So anyways, it's just a different way that we can think about these decisions in our business. Okay, so this question is really about, let me just read it out here. Okay. I recently took on a client who I had a gut feeling about during our discovery call, but I said yes anyways because I felt guilty turning someone away. Relatable. It hasn't been going well and I dread our sessions. How do you handle situations where you realize midway through working with someone that they're not the right fit? And how do you get better at screening for that before you even say yes? Okay. So this is a really important one. And I just want you to know that if you find yourself in this situation or if you've been there, you are not alone. This is something that I think every business owner will experience at some point. And though it is so unpleasant, you are not alone. And I don't want you to feel any shame or any guilt around that, because sometimes there's reasons why we choose to take clients on, and they're maybe not for the right reasons. And it takes some time to develop that skill set in business and be able to say, really say no, especially when you're just getting started and you're really trying to make money in the business. And it can be really difficult to say no. So let's talk a little bit about how to mitigate this risk and then what to do if you're in this situation. Starting off, I think a really important piece here is that, making space and room for the right type of clients is actually really protective when it comes to your business, your time, your reputation, how you feel about all of those things, not just taking on any clients. It can be really tempting at the very beginning of business to take on just anyone because you are trying to make as much money as possible. And maybe you don't want to say no to people. But what I've really found is that if you are saying yes to the wrong types of people, the likelihood for negative things to come out of that are higher. So it just not being the right fit for you and the person, right? Having that relationship or just where you're feeling like you're misaligned, the potential for them to perhaps leave a review, maybe not such a favorable review, those things actually become higher when you work with people that aren't necessarily the right fit versus if you just said no right at the beginning. So what are some of the ways to be able to mitigate this risk? Well, one of the ways is to be able to screen people before you work with them. And you can do this for anything, by the way. You can do this for a digital product. You can do this for consulting. You can do this for whatever you want by making it very clear on your sales page, who your product or service is right for and who it's not right for. But you can also add another level of screening. So getting people to answer some questions, perhaps before they even hop on a discovery call with you, to make sure that they fit a certain type of criteria, or just to have certain questions that happen, or that come up that you go to during a discovery call to see if they're the right fit for your services. Now, what happens if you go through those questions and you're like, this person really isn't the right fit? Well, you don't have to just say, no, I'm not going to work with you. A really supportive way to handle this situation would just be to say something like, hey, you know what? I so appreciate you sharing this information with me. And, though I would love to be able to support you, I don't necessarily think that my services are actually the right fit for what you're looking for. However, I have a number of different resources here or dietitians here that I'm happy to give, and I'm happy to pass along their information to you for you to be able to reach out to them because I think they might be a better fit for you. That is, people just want to feel like they're being seen, right? And feel like they're being respected. And if you're sitting there and you're from a place of fear, you're like, no, you're making that a supportive interaction to say, what, I'm very invested in your success here. And I actually don't think I'm the right person for you. That shows a lot of maturity. It shows a lot of professionalism. And you're also still supporting the person by finding the resources or tools that are actually going to be the right fit for them. And so what a lot of dietitians will do is they will, if they've had someone come to them that they're like, this isn't quite the right match, they'll post in the DSC community and say, hey, are there any other dietitians in this location that would be willing to hop on a call with this potential client? And it might be, just because it's not the right fit for you, it might be the perfect fit for someone else. Doing that screening process at the beginning can be a really great way to be able to mitigate this risk. So, for existing clients, there's a number of different things here that you can do. And we often encourage our dietitians to, if they're experiencing this, come in the community and post a question, post your situation, tell us what you've already done. And then dietitians can then respond back and say, here's how I would approach this situation, or here's what I would do. And it often includes, a series of steps of clarifying scope, clarifying the boundaries of what you do and what you perhaps don't do, making sure that you're naming it directly. So I want to make sure I'm serving you in the best way for both you and me, and again, setting them up with potential next steps if that's not you, right? What could they do from here that would actually give them the success that they want and need? Because they want that, you want that. And so, there's still ways that you can be supportive here for sure. And so, so there's a number of steps that can be taken here. If you find yourself in this situation, try not to panic, try not to make an emotional reactive decision, because you don't want to be in a situation where you do that and it ends up with a negative interaction where the person's not happy, you're not happy, and then they potentially leave you not a good review online or something like that, right? There's a lot of steps that can be taken before that to be able to mitigate that risk. And so again, we always encourage dietitians, post in the community, tell us your situation, and then we can crowdsource a way to go about this in the most professional way possible that really respects the client, respects you as the practitioner, respects the services that you're able to provide, but also protects your boundaries as well, because it really is what is that sweet spot between all of those different pieces or components. Okay. So I hope that was helpful. I really enjoyed that episode. That was fun to talk about all those topics there. If I can ask, if you are somebody who has enjoyed this podcast, if you've gotten a lot of value out of it, can you please leave us a rating and a review, whether you listen on Apple Podcast or Spotify? That would be incredibly helpful. That is how this podcast gets shown to more people, by having more positive ratings and reviews. So I would so appreciate your time. Just taking 2 or 3 minutes of your time to do that would be absolutely amazing. In the Apple Podcast app, it's a little bit less intuitive. You have to scroll to the bottom. You got to just press on the podcast title, scroll to the very bottom, and then you can leave your rating and review there. I find on Spotify, it's a little bit easier. There's I think it's just review button right beside the title of the podcast name. So it becomes a little bit easier to do there. But anyways, I would so appreciate that. Otherwise, I hope you have an amazing week. I hope to see you at the summit. I hope to see you in our entrepreneurship membership. If you're wondering which one's the right fit for you, just shoot me a DM at kristaco.rd, and I'm more than happy to chat back and forth with you about the right option. I have that conversation with dietitians all the time, so do not hesitate to reach out. Okay, I hope you have an awesome rest of your week, and I will see you in the next episode.